I never thought I'd fear my own son. It started with a sound, the soft scrape of a chair leg across the kitchen floor, the kind of sound that used to mean breakfast, laughter, or a casual Sunday argument about burnt toast. But that morning it was different. Cold, careful. My son Daniel sat across from me with a stack of papers and a voice too calm for comfort. "Mom, it's for your own good," he said, pushing the documents toward me. "We need to get your finances in order. You're not as sharp as you used to be." The words hit harder than I expected, not as sharp. I stirred my tea, watching the steam twist like a ghost between us. "I can still balance my checkbook, Daniel," I said, smiling the way mothers do when they're trying not to cry. He sighed, that heavy, disappointed sigh I used to give him when he missed curfew as a teenager. "It's not about the checkbook, it's about planning ahead. You've had a few forgetful moments." Forgetful, he meant the time I left the oven on after baking cookies, or when I couldn't remember where I put my keys. Ordinary things, ordinary aging. But in his eyes, they were warning signs. The pen trembled in my hand as I skimmed the papers. Power of attorney, joint bank account. He'd already filled out most of it. All I needed to do was sign. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe my son was helping, not taking, so I signed for my own good. The change came quietly, subtle like a draft sneaking through a cracked window. First, it was the mail. Bills stopped arriving. He said he'd handle them. Then my car disappeared. "Too expensive to maintain," he said. "I'll drive you wherever you need to go." My independence shrank with every favor he offered. He started spending more time at my house, rearranging furniture, changing passwords, selling my old dining set because it didn't fit the aesthetic. I didn't even recognize my living room anymore. The scent of lemon polish and pine candles replaced the warm smell of lavender and old wood. At night, I'd walk through the hallways, touching the walls as if the paint might whisper memories back to me. I missed my life, not the one I lived decades ago, but the one I had just a year ago before he decided I needed saving. One evening, as I reached for my tea kettle, I noticed the silence. No hum of the refrigerator, no ticking clock. He unplugged everything to save electricity. My own house felt like a stranger's home. I asked him one night gently, "Daniel, why are you doing this?" He looked at me like I was a child asking why the sky is blue. "Because you need me, and I can't let you ruin what's left of your life." A week later, I discovered the first betrayal. I went to buy groceries, a small trip to the market, something to remind myself I was still capable, but my debit card declined, twice. I laughed it off to the cashier, but my stomach twisted. When I checked with the bank, they said my account had been merged into Daniel's for security reasons. My voice shook as I asked, "Can I access it?" The banker's polite smile faltered. "Technically, no, you'd need your son's permission." I walked home in a fog, every step heavier than the last. My money, my name, my son. When I confronted him, he didn't even flinch. "Mom, I told you, you get overwhelmed with bills, this way you don't have to worry." "But I am worried," I said, my voice rising. "That's my money, I earned it." He rubbed his temples. "And I'm managing it, do you want to end up broke in a nursing home?" The question stung. I'd worked 38 years as a teacher, saved every spare dollar, clipped coupons when Daniel was in college. I dreamed of travel, gardening, quiet mornings. Not this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, the one piece of furniture he hadn't sold yet, and stared at the empty seat across from me. The kettle hissed faintly, and I thought of how he used to call me his rock. When did I become his burden? Then came the ultimatum. He showed up with a stack of boxes. "We're downsizing," he announced. "You're moving in with me and Laura." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Daniel, I like my home." He didn't smile. "It's not up for debate." The air grew thick. I looked around, my photos gone, my shelves half empty. My home was already being erased, one box at a time. "Daniel," I said softly, "this is my house." He stepped closer, his tone turning sharp. "You can't live alone anymore. You forget things. You need supervision." "Supervision," I repeated, my hands shaking. "I'm not a child." He didn't answer. He just picked up a box and walked out. That night, I found the courage to snoop, something I'd never done in my life. While he was asleep in the guest room, I went through his briefcase. Inside were bank statements, emails, and a spreadsheet titled Transfer Plan. My heart raced as I read it. He wasn't just managing my money, he was using it. Credit cards under my name, withdrawals labeled as asset transfers, even a car purchase registered to his address. A cold sweat broke across my back. My son, my only child, had turned me into a funding source. The next morning, I confronted him. "How could you?" I demanded, holding up the papers. "This is theft." He snatched the documents from my hands. "You're confused, Mom. You don't understand finances anymore." "Don't you dare patronize me," I shouted. "I understand betrayal just fine." For the first time, I saw it, that flicker of guilt in his eyes, quickly smothered by pride. It's still for your own good, he muttered. You'd waste it anyway. I called my sister that afternoon. We hadn't spoken in months, not since Daniel convinced me she was interfering. When she answered, I broke down. He's taken everything, Lydia, my money, my home. He says it's for my own good. There was silence, then her voice, low, steady, fierce. Listen to me, you're not crazy. He's gaslighting you. Get copies of everything, I'll help. That night, I hid my old phone behind the bookshelf and took photos of every document I could find, the statements, the forms, even the emails. My hands trembled as I hit send to Lydia. The next morning, Daniel noticed the missing papers. His eyes narrowed. Where are they? I lied, I threw them away. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight. You shouldn't have done that. His tone wasn't sun-like, it was warning-like. The following week, he sold my antique piano, the one my late husband used to play. He didn't even tell me. I came home from a walk and it was gone. The empty space where it stood felt like a grave. I sank to the floor, sobbing. For the first time in my life, I hated my own child. Later that night, I overheard him whispering on the phone. Yeah, she's slipping faster than I thought, should have full access by next month. Slipping faster. He was planning to take everything. I pressed my ear against the door, my pulse hammering. Yeah, if she resists, we'll just say she's not competent. Got the papers ready. That was the moment something inside me cracked and something else woke up. If he wanted a war, I would give him one. But I'd fight it quietly, the way mothers do, patiently, with purpose and for my own good. The morning after I overheard Daniel's call, the world looked different. The same sunlight streamed through the kitchen curtains, but it felt sharp, exposing, almost cruel. I watched dust motes float in the air, golden and slow, as my son, my betrayer, ate the breakfast I made him. Eggs are a bit dry, he said without looking up from his phone. I wanted to throw the plate at the wall. Instead, I smiled. Sorry, dear, I'll do better tomorrow. That was the moment I decided I'd stop fighting him openly. I'd let him think he'd won. Because only then could I start winning. I called Lydia from the public library that afternoon quietly from behind a row of old travel magazines. I have proof, I whispered. Photos, documents, everything, but I need help. Her voice trembled. He's using your accounts, right? I can connect you with a lawyer, someone discreet. A lawyer, I echoed. The word felt foreign, legal, final. Lydia, he's my son. She sighed, and you're his victim, whether you want to say it or not. That word victim sliced deep. I'd spent my whole life being strong, steady, a teacher, a mother, a widow who rebuilt her life. Victims were helpless, I was. But as I hung up, the truth sat heavy in my chest. I was losing everything because I'd believed love meant trust. That evening, I played the part. I let Daniel walk me through the downsizing plan, nodding as if I agreed. You're right, I told him. This house is too big for me. He relaxed for the first time in weeks. See, I told you, you'll love living with us. Laura's already picked your room. Lovely, I said, forcing a smile. Inside, I was memorizing every detail, his tone, his words, his confidence. I needed him comfortable, complacent. That night after he fell asleep, I went through his laptop. My hands shook as I scrolled. There were emails between him and someone named. Subject lines like wire transfer update and asset movement confirmation. I opened one and froze. Funds received. Thanks to your mom's signature, we're clear to liquidate the remaining account. You'll get your cut next week. Cut. Liquidate. My son had turned my life savings into a business deal. The next day, I printed every email I could find and hid the papers behind the insulation panel in the laundry room. My old teacher's instinct kicked in. I labeled each page, numbered the evidence. I was building a case, even if I didn't yet know how to win it. That week, Daniel sold my living room furniture to make the move easier. I came home to bare floors and echoes. The couch where I used to read, the armchair that held my husband's old flannel throw, gone. It's just stuff, Mom, Daniel said. We'll get you new things at my place. I wanted to scream that this was my place, my history, but instead I nodded. You're right, it's just stuff. But I felt something rising in me, something I hadn't felt in years, a fire, small, steady, dangerous. Days blurred, I began leaving small notes to myself, hidden like breadcrumbs, in books under vases behind photos. Remember who you are, he's lying, you're not crazy. Lydia came by one morning under the pretense of a sister's brunch. Daniel didn't like it. She's a bad influence, he muttered when she left. You get confused when people fill your head with nonsense. But what she left behind wasn't nonsense. It was a burner phone and a business card tucked under my napkin. Sarah, elder rights attorney. That night, I dialed the number from my car, parked 2 blocks away under the orange glow of a streetlight. Mrs., a warm voice answered. Your sister said you might call, tell me everything. It poured out of me, the papers, the accounts, the signatures I didn't remember signing, the stolen piano, the humiliation of having to ask my son for grocery money. When I finished, Sarah was quiet. Then she said, "You're describing financial elder abuse, and you have a solid case." The word abuse made me flinch. No, no, he's just misguided. "Mrs., she said gently, "if you don't stop him, he'll destroy everything you've worked for." The next week, Sarah met me in person at the park by the duck pond where no one could overhear. She looked young but sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who had seen too many stories like mine. "First, we'll revoke his power of attorney," she said. "Then we freeze the joint accounts." "But he'll notice," I whispered. She smiled. "Good, that's when we'll see who he really is." For the first time in months, I felt something I thought I'd lost control. When I got home, Daniel was in the kitchen packing. "Where were you?" "Walking," I said lightly. He frowned. "You should tell me when you leave the house." I didn't realize I needed permission. His jaw tightened. "Mom, stop acting like this. You're making everything harder." "I'm just trying to live my life, Daniel." He slammed his hand on the counter. The sound made me jump. "You don't have a life anymore," he snapped. "Not without me." That silence afterward was heavy, dangerous. He looked at me, realizing what he'd said. I didn't mean. "Yes," I said quietly, "you did." He left the room and I felt my knees weaken. I clutched the edge of the counter, trembling. My son was gone. The man standing in his place was a stranger wearing his face. The next morning, I moved faster. I met Sarah downtown to sign the revocation documents. As I held the pen, my hand shook, but this time it wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. The papers glowed white under the office light, symbols of freedom disguised as legal jargon. When I signed, I felt my heart steady. "He won't take anything else from me." Sarah nodded. "We'll serve him the notice tomorrow. Be prepared for him to get angry." Angry? That was an understatement. He came home late that night, his voice already raised from the driveway. "What did you do?" I froze. He found out faster than we thought. He stormed in, waving a letter, the notice Sarah's office had sent by courier. "You revoked my access. Are you insane?" "Daniel," I started, but he cut me off. "You don't understand what you're doing. You're being manipulated." "No," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "For once, I see exactly what's happening." His face twisted with something dark, rage, guilt, fear, maybe all three. "You're ruining everything," he hissed. "Do you even know how much I've done for you?" "Yes," I said softly, "too much." He threw the papers on the floor and stormed out. I watched his car taillights disappear into the night and felt a mix of terror and relief. For the first time in months, I was alone, truly alone. And free. But freedom, I soon learned, came at a cost. The next morning, my front door was wide open. My jewelry box gone, my computer missing. He'd come back while I slept. The police took my statement, but one officer sighed. "Hard to prove it was him, ma'am, since you shared access." I stared at the empty desk where my computer had been. "He's not going to stop, is he?" The officer shrugged helplessly. "Not unless the court tells him to." That night I sat in the dark, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. My heart ached not for the stolen things, but for the boy who used to run through this house barefoot, laughing, asking for bedtime stories. Where had that boy gone? Lydia stayed over the next few nights, refusing to leave me alone. "He's dangerous, Mary," she said. "Promise me you'll let Sarah handle everything." I nodded, but my eyes stayed fixed on the window, because deep down I knew this wasn't over. Daniel wasn't just going to walk away quietly. And I wasn't going to let him destroy me silently either. The real war was only beginning. The morning after the break-in, the house smelled of stale coffee and fear. The police had left muddy footprints by the door, and Lydia was in the kitchen, boiling water she'd forgotten about twice. We were both shaken, but I was past the point of panic. I was in that strange calm that comes when a heart finally accepts the worst. I remember sitting at the table and staring at the sunlight cutting through the curtains. The same table where I'd once taught Daniel to read, where we'd done school projects and celebrated birthdays. Now it felt like the stage of a crime scene. My crime, loving him too much. Sarah arrived just before noon, files tucked under her arm, her voice brisk but kind. "He'll escalate before he stops," she said, "but we're ready for him." She laid out a folder on the table. Inside were my bank statements, copies of signed withdrawals, and a report she'd compiled with her firm's investigator. "Mrs., she said quietly, "your son has drained nearly $230,000 over the past year." The room tilted. I felt the words before I fully heard them, like an earthquake beneath my ribs. "That's impossible," I whispered. "That's my retirement, my house money." "I'm sorry," she said. He moved funds through shell accounts, some under your name. There's enough to prove fraud and coercion. Coercion, such a clean word for such a dirty act. I pressed my palms together and stared at the photos she'd printed, screenshots of emails, bank records, transactions labeled home repair and medical expenses. Lies, every one of them. My son hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen trust, the one currency we'd built our entire lives on. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house sounded like a memory breaking. I walked down the hallway barefoot, the floor cold under my feet, and stopped outside Daniel's old room. The door was slightly open, just as he'd left it the day he moved out. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and cedar. His childhood trophies lined the shelf, a crooked poster of a baseball player still taped to the wall. For a moment, I saw him as he used to be, freckles, messy hair, the way he'd fall asleep clutching his favorite book. "How did we get here?" I whispered to the empty room. I sat on the bed and cried quietly, the kind of tears that come without sound, just salt and shaking hands. I wanted to hate him, but a mother's love doesn't die cleanly. It lingers, bruised but breathing. The next morning, Sarah called. "We can take this to court," she said. "We have enough evidence for a restraining order and criminal charges." "Criminal?" I repeated, the word heavy on my tongue. "You mean prison?" "Yes." The silence stretched. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. I thought of Daniel behind bars, of Laura crying, of my two bright little faces who still called me grandma with joy. Could I really destroy my son to save myself? Sarah must sensed my hesitation. "Mary," she said softly, "this isn't vengeance, it's protection for you and for them. If he's done this to you, he could do it again to someone else." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. That evening, Lydia brought over a casserole, and that familiar big sister tone she'd always used when she thought I was too soft. "You need to press charges," she said flatly, setting the dish on the counter. I shook my head. "He's still my son." "And you're still his victim." The word hit like a slap. "Don't call me that." "Then stop acting like one." Her voice cracked a little as she said it, and I realized this wasn't just about me. Lydia had been watching her sister disappear for months, and she was fighting to get me back. I looked down at my trembling hands. "If I do this," I whispered, "there's no going back." "Mary," she said, touching my shoulder, "there already is." 2 days later, Sarah arranged a meeting at her office with a detective named. He was quiet, middle-aged, with eyes that saw too much. He spoke gently, but his words were firm. "Mrs. We'll start with a statement. After that, we'll move forward with a financial investigation. Your son will be." "My son," I murmured, my voice trembling. "He's not a monster, detective, he's just lost." He nodded. "Most of them aren't monsters, but lost people can still hurt the ones they love." When he handed me the pen to sign my statement, I stared at it for a long time. The same kind of pen I'd used to sign over my rights to Daniel months ago. I pressed it to the paper. My hand shook, but I signed anyway. That single stroke of ink felt heavier than any lesson I'd ever taught, any paper I'd ever graded. It was a declaration not of war, but of survival. Days passed in uneasy quiet. Daniel didn't call. Laura didn't either. The absence felt like an open wound. Then one afternoon, as I watered my garden, a car pulled into the driveway. My stomach dropped. Daniel stepped out, wearing the same polished smile he used to charm everyone except me. "Mom," he called, walking up the path, "we need to talk." I froze, hose dripping water onto my shoes. There's nothing left to talk about, Daniel. He raised his hands. "Please, just hear me out. You didn't have to get the police involved." "I didn't have to," I repeated, my voice rising. "You stole from me, you lied, you tried to take my house." He looked around nervously, lowering his voice. "You're making it sound worse than it is. I was just protecting me," I snapped. "Don't you dare say it again." He exhaled, his charm faltering. "Mom, you're confused. You're being manipulated by Aunt Lydia and some lawyer who wants your money." I stared at him, really stared. And for the first time, I saw through the act, the flicker of panic in his eyes, the way his hands trembled. "You're the one who's confused," I said quietly, "because I finally remember who I am." Later that evening, I found a note slid under my door. No envelope, just a torn piece of paper, the handwriting unmistakably his. "Stop this before it goes too far, you'll regret it." No signature, no love, just a threat written by my own child. I folded it carefully, placed it in the folder marked evidence, and closed the drawer. The quiet war had become open combat. A few nights later, I woke to a noise outside, footsteps on the porch, the creak of the gate. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone. By the time the police arrived, whoever it was had gone. But in the morning, I found the damage. My car's windshield shattered, my mailbox torn from the ground, and spray painted across the side of my house in jagged black letters. Liar. The officer who came to take photos shook his head. Looks personal. It was. That afternoon, Sarah filed for a restraining order. We'll keep you safe, she promised, but I didn't feel safe, not yet. Because I knew Daniel wasn't done. That night, as I sat alone with a cup of tea, I looked around my half-empty house and thought of everything he'd taken, and everything I still had. My voice, my will, my truth. And beneath all the grief and anger, a question began to form, quiet, haunting, relentless. Can a mother ever truly destroy her child to save herself? The answer, I realized, was coming soon, and whatever it was, I'd have to live with it. The morning after the vandalism, I woke to a strange calm. The world outside was gray and wet, a drizzle whispering against the windows. Lydia was asleep on the couch, her hand still gripping the baseball bat she'd insisted on keeping just in case. I stood at the window, watching the rain wash streaks of black paint from the walls, smearing the word liar into a dripping blur. It felt like the house was crying with me. Sarah called around 9. We filed for an emergency hearing, she said. You'll need to testify this week. The thought of facing Daniel in court made my stomach twist. I'd seen my son angry before, but this was different. This was the kind of anger that came from being exposed. Will he be there? I asked quietly. Yes, but I'll be with you the entire time. After she hung up, I leaned against the counter and stared at the empty teacup in my hand. I tried to remember what my life had felt like before all of this, before the fear, before the lies, before love became a battlefield. I couldn't. The day of the hearing, the courtroom felt colder than I expected. The air smelled faintly of paper and coffee, and the polished wood benches gleamed under the fluorescent lights. I wore my late husband's old watch, the one that always made me feel grounded. Daniel sat across the room next to his lawyer. He looked immaculate, tailored suit, clean shave, eyes that darted toward me but didn't linger. For a brief moment, I saw the boy who used to beg for one more bedtime story, and my heart cracked again. When the judge entered, everyone stood. I felt my knees wobble, but I stayed upright. Sarah whispered beside me, "You're doing great, just tell the truth." That was the easiest and hardest instruction I'd ever been given. When it was my turn, I took the stand. The microphone hummed softly. My voice felt small at first, but the longer I spoke, the stronger it grew. I trusted my son, I began. I signed over power of attorney because he told me it was for my own good. I thought I was protecting myself. I didn't realize I was handing him the keys to my entire life. Daniel's lawyer objected once, twice, claiming emotional manipulation. The judge overruled both. I showed them the documents, the withdrawals, the forged signatures, the emails, the photos of the vandalism, the note he left. As I spoke, I refused to look at Daniel, but I could feel him watching me, burning holes through my resolve. When I finished, the judge asked if I had anything else to add. I took a deep breath. Your Honor, I said, voice trembling, I love my son, I always will, but love doesn't mean silence. I just want my name, my peace, and my life back. For a moment, the courtroom was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. After I stepped down, Daniel was called to testify. His lawyer had coached him well. He looked calm, remorseful, even sympathetic. She's confused, he said softly. She forgets things. I was trying to help her manage her finances before she got taken advantage of. I felt my blood boil. Taken advantage of, the irony was suffocating. He produced neatly printed charts showing expenses, medical bills, home repairs, all fabricated but convincing. Sarah leaned toward me. Stay calm, he's overplaying it. Then Daniel said something that made my stomach drop. She's being manipulated by her sister and that lawyer. They convinced her to destroy her own family. I looked up, and for a split second our eyes met. There was no remorse there, only calculation. He wasn't just defending himself, he was rewriting the story. When the session adjourned for lunch, I walked outside into the courtyard. The sun had broken through the clouds, sharp and blinding. Lydia came up beside me, furious. The nerve of him, he's lying through his teeth. I know, I whispered, but the judge doesn't. Sarah joined us a moment later, flipping through her notes. Don't worry, we'll dismantle his narrative piece by piece, but we'll need one thing, proof of intent. Intent, I asked. She nodded, something that shows he knew he was deceiving you. Emails, texts, recordings, anything. I froze. Recordings. I remembered the night I'd hidden my old phone behind the bookshelf months ago when I first suspected him. I'd forgotten all about it. It might still have his voice on tape. The night he said, if she resists, we'll just say she's not competent. That could change everything. When I got home, I tore through the bookshelf until my fingers brushed something small and dusty. The phone. I plugged it in, praying it would turn on. The screen flickered to life, low battery but still breathing. I scrolled through the audio files, heart hammering, and there it was. March 12th, 11:47 p.m. I pressed play. Yeah, she's slipping faster than I thought, should have full access by next month. If she resists, we'll just say she's not competent. His voice, clear, calm, calculated. I sank onto the floor, shaking. There it was, the smoking gun, proof that my son had planned everything. The next day, Sarah submitted the recording as evidence. The courtroom felt different, tense, electric. Daniel's lawyer objected immediately. This was obtained without consent. But Sarah was ready. Your Honor, the recording took place in the plaintiff's home without coercion or expectation of privacy. The judge listened carefully, then nodded. Admissible. When the recording played, the room went silent. Hearing his voice echo through that chamber broke something in me. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall quietly. When it ended, I didn't look at him. I couldn't. Afterward, the judge announced a temporary freeze on Daniel's assets and a restraining order pending further investigation. He turned to me as he left the courtroom, his eyes wild. You ruined me, he hissed under his breath. You have no idea what you've done. I didn't respond. For once, silence was my weapon. Outside, Lydia hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. You did it, she whispered. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, because winning against your own child doesn't feel like winning at all. That night I sat alone on the porch, listening to the wind move through the trees. The stars were faint, but the sky was finally clear. I thought of all the mothers who had loved too deeply, trusted too easily, forgiven too quickly. The kind of love that bends until it breaks. I wasn't sure what would happen next, the trial, the aftermath, the years ahead, but I knew this. I had faced my son and spoken the truth. And yet, beneath the relief, a deeper ache whispered. What broke him? What made him believe control was love? Somewhere between that question and the sound of the wind, I realized this war wasn't over. Because the real battle wasn't for my money or my house. It was for his soul. And I didn't know if I could save it. The days after the court hearing were a blur of headlines, phone calls, and silence. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages I didn't want to read, neighbors pretending to be concerned, old friends offering polite sympathy wrapped in gossip. Even Laura texted once. You've gone too far, Mary. He was trying to protect you. I stared at her message until my vision blurred. Protect me? That phrase again. It followed me everywhere now like a shadow whispering mockery. I deleted the message without replying. I didn't have words left for defense. I was tired of defending my sanity, my decisions, my truth. The restraining order was active, but fear doesn't respect legal documents. Every creak of the porch made me tense. I kept the lights on at night and the curtains drawn tight. Lydia stayed with me when she could, but she had her own life, her own family. When she left, I tried to pretend the house didn't feel haunted. I thought I'd feel safer after the judge's ruling. I didn't, because safety wasn't just about locked doors anymore. It was about rebuilding the pieces of myself Daniel had tried to erase. Sarah called me on a Thursday morning, her tone businesslike but gentle. They've found more, she said. The investigator traced several transfers to an account under an LLC Daniel created 6 months before the power of attorney. What kind of company? I asked. Her pause told me it wasn't good. It's called Hearthstone Home Solutions. It's registered in both your names, but you were added as a silent partner. I never signed for that, I said, gripping the phone. I know, she said, but the documents show your signature. Forgery again. It felt like drowning in betrayal all over. I sank into my chair, my breath shallow. Why would he do that? What could he possibly need so much money for? Sarah hesitated. We think he was using your assets to cover debts, personal debts, maybe gambling, maybe worse. My throat went dry. You mean crime? It's possible, she said softly. We'll know soon. That night, I found myself wandering through the house again. Each room was a museum of losses. The kitchen still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, the one Daniel insisted on buying because it smelled younger. The walls still had small holes where family photos used to hang. I opened a drawer and found an old photograph. Daniel at 12, holding a science fair trophy, beaming at me. His handwriting on the back read, "For Mom, my biggest supporter." I pressed it to my chest and whispered, "What happened to you, baby?" The tears came slowly this time, not the wild sobs of shock, but the quiet kind, the ones that feel like they'll never stop. A few days later, Sarah asked to meet again, this time not in her office but at a near the courthouse. When I arrived, she looked different, not just tired, burdened. There's something else, she said, sliding a folder toward me. Our investigator found correspondence between Daniel and your late husband's former business partner. I blinked, Robert. Yes, it seems Daniel approached him months ago, claiming he had power of attorney and wanted to access your husband's old accounts. My heart lurched. Those accounts were closed years ago. They were, Sarah said carefully, but there was one, an insurance policy you didn't know about, worth over $70,000. I stared at her, the world narrowing to a pinpoint. He took it. She nodded. He cashed it under your authorization signature. My mouth went dry, but I never. I know, she interrupted softly. We have proof you didn't. That's the nail in the coffin for the fraud case. For a long time I couldn't speak. My husband's life insurance, the money he'd left to keep me safe. My son had stolen his father's final gift to me. That night I sat in my husband's old recliner and stared at the empty spot where his piano once stood. I tried to imagine what he'd say if he were here. He'd probably tell me to stay strong, to keep fighting, but I also knew he'd be heartbroken, because we'd both raised Daniel to believe in honesty, compassion, integrity, and somewhere along the line he'd traded those for greed. Or maybe, I thought bitterly, we hadn't raised him to handle failure. Maybe we'd loved him too much, shielded him too often, made him think the world and everyone in it owed him forgiveness. The thought made me sick with guilt. Maybe part of this was my fault. 2 days later, Sarah called again. He's agreed to a plea negotiation, she said. I froze. He's admitting guilt. Not yet, but his lawyer reached out. He wants to avoid trial. I didn't know whether to feel relief or heartbreak, so what happens next? If he confesses to the fraudulent transfers and repays part of the money, the DA might consider a reduced sentence. I sank into my chair. How much time are we talking? Maybe a year in county jail, possibly probation if he cooperates fully. I closed my eyes. A year. It wasn't enough for what he'd done, but it was too much for the boy I once knew. That night my phone rang, unknown number. My instinct told me it was him. I answered anyway. Mom, he said, his voice was low, shaky. Please don't do this, don't ruin my life. I didn't speak. I'll pay it back, he said. All of it, just tell them you misunderstood. You know I never meant to hurt you. The calm in me surprised us both. You didn't mean to hurt me, Daniel. You meant to control me. There's a difference. His breath hitched. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. You can't live alone anymore. Stop, I said sharply. Stop pretending this is about love. There was silence, then a sound I didn't expect, a sob. Dad left nothing for me, he said suddenly. You got everything, the house, the insurance, the savings. He treated me like a child until the day he died. I just wanted my share, my life, my chance. The truth hit like a blade, blunt but deep. This wasn't just greed, it was resentment, a wound festering for years disguised as duty. Daniel, I whispered, if you'd asked, I would have given you anything. You didn't need to steal my peace. He didn't reply, then the line went dead. I sat there long after, the phone still in my hand, the weight of his words echoing. He wanted his share. And maybe that was the real tragedy, that in trying to take what he thought he deserved, he'd lost everything that truly mattered. The next morning I called Sarah. Tell the DA I'll accept the plea, I said, but on one condition. She paused. What condition? I want him to get counseling, not just prison. I want him to understand what he did and why. Sarah was quiet for a moment. That's unorthodox, but I'll ask. I hung up and stared at the pale morning light creeping across the floor. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, just exhaustion, the kind that comes after surviving a storm and realizing the wreckage isn't just around you, it's inside you. That night, I found myself whispering to the empty air, I forgive you, Daniel, but I'll never forget what it cost us. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing the trees against the house like an apology. And somewhere between forgiveness and grief, I felt something I hadn't in months, peace, fragile but real. Still, I knew the war wasn't fully over. Court decisions could end battles, but not the ache of broken bloodlines. Because the question still lingered, haunting me even as I drifted toward sleep. Can forgiveness truly heal a wound cut by the ones who share your blood? The weeks after Daniel's plea felt like walking through fog, dense, quiet, endless. The house was safe again, legally speaking. The locks had been changed, the restraining order still stood, and the money that hadn't vanished was slowly being restored through restitution. But safety didn't mean peace. Not when your heart is still waiting for footsteps that shouldn't come. Every morning I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where all of this began, and forced myself to write 3 things I was grateful for. Sarah's advice. It's part of healing, she'd said. You need to remember what's still yours. Day 1, my sister Lydia. Day 2, my garden. Day 3, the truth. By day 10, I realized I was writing smaller, quieter things: the smell of coffee, the sound of rain, the courage to be alone. It wasn't much, but it was something. One gray afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. I almost didn't open it. No return address, but I knew that handwriting. It was from Daniel. Mom, they say writing helps during the program. The counselor thinks I should apologize, but I don't know where to begin. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm trying to understand why I did what I did. I'm sorry. Dia. I read it 3 times. My hands trembled, but my heart stayed oddly still. The last time I'd heard his voice, it was full of anger and desperation. Now his words were stripped bare, quiet, uncertain, almost childlike. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the wooden box that held my husband's watch and old photographs. I couldn't forgive him yet, but I wasn't ready to hate him anymore either. The small-town news outlets had picked up my story. Local woman wins elder abuse case against son. The headline made me sick. Winning didn't feel like triumph, it felt like survival. At the grocery store, whispers followed me like shadows. That's her. Poor woman. Can you imagine? Yes, I could. I lived it. One woman, someone I'd known from church for 30 years, stopped me near the fruit aisle. You're so brave, she said softly. If my son ever tried something like that, I don't know what I'd do. I smiled politely, but inside I thought, you do what I did, you'd fight, and then you'd cry for months after winning. Lydia invited me to stay with her for a few weeks to get away from the gossip and ghosts. I agreed. Her house was smaller, cozier. The air always smelled faintly of vanilla candles and rosemary. We spent our days tending her garden, baking, and pretending the world outside didn't exist. But some nights, when the clock struck midnight, we'd sit on her porch and talk in whispers. Do you think he really means it? Lydia asked one night. Means what? The apology. I stared at the stars, faint and far away. I think he means it now, I just don't know if that means anything. She reached over and squeezed my hand. You did what you had to do. I know, I said quietly, but it still feels like I failed him somehow. Lydia sighed. You didn't fail him, Mary, he failed himself. You just refused to go down with him. Her words should have comforted me. Instead, they echoed through my chest like an ache that wouldn't fade. A month later, Laura came to see me. I didn't recognize her car at first, parked out front with the engine running. When she stepped out, she looked thinner, older. Her eyes were red, but not from crying, more from exhaustion. Can we talk? She asked, her voice soft. Lydia was inside, but I waved her off. It's fine, I said, let her. We sat on the porch, the air between us thick with things unsaid. I don't know what to say to you, Laura began. Daniel, he's been in counseling for 3 weeks, he's different. He talks about what he did, how he justified it to himself. I think he really thought he was helping you. I shook my head. Helping doesn't mean taking control. I know, she said quickly. I know I'm not defending him, she hesitated, eyes shining. He's scared, Mary. He says he hears your voice in his dreams. He says he can't forgive himself. I looked at her, really looked, at the woman who'd stood by my son's side while he dismantled my life. I saw her guilt, her loyalty, her love. Do you hate me? She asked suddenly. No, I said after a long pause. I pity you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. He's my husband. I didn't know how bad it had gotten until it was too late. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind move through the trees. Then she said, he wants to see you. I froze. That's not allowed, the order. Through mediation, she interrupted quickly. With supervision, his counselor thinks it would help both of you heal. My stomach twisted. I wasn't ready, not yet, but something inside me whispered that closure might never come if I didn't face him again. I'll think about it, I said. She nodded, stood, and left without another word. That night, Lydia and I sat up late. Don't do it, she said firmly. He'll manipulate you again. Maybe, I said, but maybe this time I'll be stronger. She frowned. Why do you always think it's your job to fix everything? Because no one else will, I whispered. She sighed, too tired to argue. When she went to bed, I stayed by the window, staring at the moon. It hung low and pale like a bruise in the sky. What if this meeting wasn't about forgiveness? What if it was about understanding, about facing the brokenness in both of us and numbing it? I didn't know if I was ready, but I knew I had to try. The following week, Sarah arranged the mediation session at a counseling center downtown. Neutral ground, beige walls, soft lighting, the kind of place meant to make hard things sound gentle. I sat in the small room, clutching a tissue I hadn't yet used. Then the door opened. Daniel walked in. He looked smaller somehow, not physically but spiritually. The confidence, the arrogance, it was gone. His hands trembled slightly as he sat down across from me. "Mom," he said quietly. For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat was thick with 1,000 words, all fighting to come out. "I didn't come here to punish you," I finally said. "I came to understand." He nodded, eyes wet. "I don't even understand myself, I just wanted to feel needed again. After Dad died, I watched you rebuild without me. I felt useless." "You were never useless," I said softly. "You were my son." He shook his head. "I thought if I could control things, I could protect you, but really I just wanted to matter." The silence that followed was heavy, sacred. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry." And for the first time in almost a year, I believed him. When the session ended, we didn't hug. We weren't ready, but we stood up slowly and I touched his hand just briefly, a mother's reflex, a peace offering. He squeezed back. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close to it, a fragile thread stretched between two broken people who still remembered love. As I walked out into the evening light, the city sounded different, less sharp, more alive. The air smelled faintly of rain and jasmine. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was surviving a war. I felt like I was learning to live again. But peace has its own price. Because healing doesn't erase the past, it just asks you to carry it differently. And as I drove home under the fatting sky, I realized some battles aren't won or lost. They're simply endured. The morning after seeing Daniel, I woke before dawn. The world outside was pale and quiet, the kind of silence that feels like forgiveness waiting to be spoken. For the first time in nearly a year, I didn't wake up to dread. I woke up to breath, deep, steady, unhurried. The kettle whistled softly. I poured myself a cup of tea and stood by the kitchen window. The garden was blooming again, roses, mint, lavender, all the things Daniel once said were too much work. I smiled faintly. Maybe healing was work too, the slow kind that demanded both patience and pruning. I wasn't enough to think everything was fixed. The court had closed the case, but life doesn't close so neatly. The community still whispered. My savings were being restored bit by bit. Daniel was still in therapy, serving his probation under supervision. We were rebuilding, not the way we used to be, but something quieter, humbler. And yet, I felt peace. Sarah called to check in that afternoon. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm learning," I said honestly. "Learning to let go of being the victim and just be me again." She chuckled softly. "That's progress, Mary." I hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do people like me ever really move on?" She paused. "You don't move on, you move through. One day you'll wake up and the pain won't define you anymore. It'll just remind you of how strong you had to be." After the call, I sat for a long while thinking about that word through. That was exactly what I'd done. Not around, not over, through. A few days later, Lydia brought the by. It was their first visit since everything happened. I was nervous, unsure if they even remembered me the same way. But the moment they ran up the walkway yelling, "Grandma," I broke down. Their little arms wrapped around my waist, their laughter spilling into the house like sunlight. For the first time, it felt alive again. They ran through the rooms that used to echo with emptiness, filling them with giggles and questions. "Can we bake cookies? Can we sleep in the big bed? Can we play piano?" The piano was gone, of course, but I showed them where it used to stand, and we made up a game, tapping rhythms on the air, pretending the music still lived there. Maybe it did. That evening, after Lydia tucked them into bed, she joined me on the porch. The sky was streaked with purple and gold, the air warm and full of crickets. "You've changed," she said. "Older," I teased. "Wiser," she corrected, calmer, like someone who finally stopped holding her breath. I smiled. Maybe I finally realized I can't fix the past, but I can stop letting it steal my future. Lydia nodded, sipping her tea. "He wrote again, didn't he?" I handed her the latest letter. "Mom," I started a journal in therapy. They told me to write one truth every day. Yesterday's was this: control is not care. Today's is love doesn't mean ownership. I know I hurt you, I can't undo it, but I can become someone you wouldn't be ashamed of. I hope you're happy, you deserve peace. Daniel. Lydia's eyes softened. "Do you believe him?" I looked up at the stars. "I believe he's trying, that's enough for now." Weeks passed and my home began to look like mine again. I repainted the living room, bought a small used piano, and filled the shelves with plants and second-hand books. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And for the first time in years, I felt safe in my own skin. I even started therapy myself. The first session was awkward, me sitting in a beige chair, staring at a stranger who asked, "So what brings you here?" I almost laughed. Where do I begin? But as I talked, really talked, something inside me began to loosen. I spoke about guilt, about motherhood, about the fear of being alone, about how love can blind you until you mistake control for care, silence for peace, and sacrifice for strength. By the end, the therapist smiled gently. "Mary," she said, "you didn't fail, you survived." I cried the entire way home, not because it hurt, but because it finally made sense. Months later, I agreed to see Daniel again, this time outside of mediation. It was spring, the air filled with the scent of new leaves and rain. We met at the same park where I'd once met Sarah, beside the duck pond. He was waiting on a bench, holding a paper bag. When he saw me, he stood immediately. "Hi, Mom." I nodded, "Hi." He handed me the bag. Inside was a small framed photo, him at 12, holding that same science fair trophy, smiling beside me. "I thought maybe you'd want this back," he said. "I took it from the house years ago." I ran my fingers along the glass. "Why?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe I wanted to keep a version of us that still made sense." I looked at him, his posture smaller, his voice quieter, his eyes finally honest. "We can't go back, Daniel," I said, "but maybe we can start something new." He nodded, tears welling. "I'd like that." We sat together for a while, watching the ducks glide across the water. It wasn't reconciliation, not fully, but it was peace, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken to be real. That night back at home, I lit a candle in the kitchen and sat at the table where everything had started, the contracts, the shouting, the fear. I breathed deeply, letting the glow wash over the memories. The house no longer felt like it felt like mine again. I thought of all the women like me, mothers, daughters, wives, who give until there's nothing left, who stay quiet for peace and call it love. If I could speak to them, I'd tell them this. Your voice is your power, your boundaries are not cruelty, and love, real love, doesn't ask you to disappear for someone else's comfort. Sometimes I still think of Daniel as the little boy who used to build forts in the living room and ask, "Are you proud of me, Mom?" Now, when I look at the man he's becoming, the one who finally faces himself instead of hiding behind control, I can answer honestly again. Yes, I whisper to the quiet, "I am proud of you." Not because of what he did, but because he's trying to change, because I did too. It's been a year since the day I took my life back. The roses in the garden are in full bloom again, red and wild. I still talk to my husband when I water them, telling him how far we've come, how our son is finding his way back. And every morning before I start the day, I write one truth in my notebook, the same habit Daniel learned in therapy. Today's truth reads, "Peace doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering without pain." As I finish writing, I glance around the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the floor, the sound of birds outside. It feels cinematic, almost unreal. This isn't the ending I imagined when it all began. It's quieter, smaller, but somehow more beautiful, because it's real, because it's mine. And for the first time, I know this. Everything I lost led me to everything I needed. My name, my money, my peace, all reclaimed, all mine, for my own good. Love without boundaries becomes control. Control without empathy becomes abuse. And forgiveness without accountability isn't healing, it's surrender. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up to the people you love, not because you've stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself. If you were in my place, if someone you loved deeply betrayed your trust, could you ever forgive them? Could you rebuild that love from the ruins? Tell me what you would do in the comments below. And if this story touched you, subscribe for more real stories about strength, truth, and second chances.